Carl Jung's final message about empaths is about to overturn everything you thought you knew about compassion. Imagine realizing that your relentless urge to soothe everyone, to absorb their pain, to disappear for the sake of others, isn't a noble gift, it's a survival mechanism. Jung discovered that the empath is, at heart, the child who was never allowed to be selfish, a child whose own needs were too overwhelming, whose feelings were too loud, whose very existence felt conditional on serving others. This isn't spiritual enlightenment, it's the imprint of a childhood where caring for oneself was a luxury, not an option. But here's what makes Jung's insight so revolutionary. He didn't see empaths as damaged or broken. Instead, he viewed them as beings already halfway through what he called individuation, the profound psychological journey toward wholeness. You may have always sensed this deep truth, even if you couldn't name it. That quiet, persistent cost to your empathy, the subtle exhaustion it leaves behind, is a signal of this journey. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet you've long felt that your true self, the one beneath the masks you wore to keep others comfortable, was never fully allowed to breathe. Your authentic self was sacrificed in the service of others' peace. By the time you reach the end of this path, you'll see why your sensitivity feels like both a gift and a burden. You'll recognize the intricate psychological patterns that transformed your natural empathy into a survival strategy, a way to navigate a world that demanded your emotional labor. Most importantly, Jung points toward what I call sacred selfishness. This is the art of establishing healthy boundaries, of transforming empathy from an automatic compulsion into a conscious choice. This isn't about caring less. It's about reclaiming the right to care for yourself with the same intensity that you have always poured into others. Can you imagine treating yourself with the devotion you've given so freely to everyone else? Jung understood something crucial that many overlook about empathic development. The empathy you express as an adult often begins in childhood as emotional hypervigilance, a survival mechanism forged when a child's safety depended on reading the moods and emotional states of their caregivers. Picture it, a child learning to anticipate their parents' feelings before a word is even spoken. Their small body constantly scanning the emotional atmosphere for danger. The child becomes a living barometer for the family's emotional climate, sensing storms before they arrive, learning that their own needs might stir tension, but anticipating others' needs ensures safety. Jung called this premature ego adaptation. Here, sophisticated psychological skills were not nurtured by healthy growth, but shaped by necessity. Your nervous system became a finely tuned seismograph, alert to every tremor in the emotional environment around you. And it is from this place that your journey toward understanding sacred selfishness begins. This isn't about conscious learning. This is adaptive wiring at its most profound. Your brain literally rewired itself to survive in an emotionally unpredictable environment, shaping pathways that honed your extraordinary sensitivity. You developed what Jung called a psychological antenna, an uncanny ability to sense what others feel and need before they even speak. But here's the revelation Jung uncovered that changes everything. This survival adaptation came at a heavy, often hidden cost. The cost was the suppression of what Jung referred to as your authentic selfishness, the healthy narcissism every child needs to cultivate a strong or grounded sense of self. As Jung wrote, The healthy individual is able to love himself as much as he loves others. But if you became an empath, the lesson you absorbed was almost the opposite. Love others more than yourself, because your needs are dangerous, unwelcome, even threatening. Think back to those early days. If you learned to read the room before you could read books, you know exactly what I mean. You were the family's emotional detective, the quiet observer scanning every tone, every glance, every shift in energy to keep the peace. This created what I call the empathic paradox. The very sensitivity that makes you so attuned to others becomes the invisible barrier, keeping you from understanding your own self. You became an expert in the inner worlds of everyone around you, while remaining a stranger to your own inner landscape. Jung understood that a pattern so adaptive in childhood can turn self-destructive in adulthood. The child who was never allowed to be selfish often grows into an adult incapable of advocating for themselves, establishing boundaries, or even recognizing their own needs. Within the hidden recesses of the unconscious, Jung made a startling discovery about those with empathic patterns. In the shadow, the rejected, suppressed parts of the psyche, he found not darkness, but what I call forbidden selfishness. This is the natural self-advocacy that childhood conditioning deemed unacceptable. Most empaths carry enormous guilt about their shadow because it houses everything they were taught was wrong. Anger, insistence on boundaries, saying no, prioritizing themselves, expressing needs, demanding respect. Jung termed this shadow formation through moral conditioning. Yet here lies Jung's revolutionary insight. These selfish impulses are not pathological. They are the missing pieces of a complete personality. An empath who never learned healthy selfishness becomes what Jung described as a wounded healer, someone who gives endlessly yet from emptiness rather than fullness, and the cost is profound. Jung observed that empaths often unconsciously resent their own compassion. They give and give, yet beneath it simmers exhaustion, frustration, even rage. There is a hidden part of them that longs to stop caring, to walk away, to finally choose themselves without guilt. And it is this forbidden selfishness, this reclaimed right to self-love, that forms the bridge from survival-driven empathy to conscious, life-giving compassion, the very path that transforms their inner world. This isn't because empaths are bad people. Far from it. The truth lies in what Jung called the compensation principle. The psyche, in its quiet wisdom, strives to restore balance when one side of development dominates, nudging the rejected qualities into consciousness. Consider what Jung described as inantroia, the tendency for any extreme to eventually turn into its opposite. The person who gives endlessly may eventually become bitter and resentful. The one who never says no can reach a breaking point. And the empath who refuses to acknowledge their shadow risks becoming disillusioned and hardened. Jung understood that integrating the shadow isn't about learning to be selfish in a harmful way. It's about reclaiming the essential right to exist as a complete human being. The empath's shadow contains what I call sacred selfishness, the healthy ego strength that allows for authentic, balanced relationships. If you've ever felt a pang of guilt simply for wanting to put yourself first, know that this isn't wrong. These desires are a vital part of your wholeness, not a moral failing. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For empaths, This darkness isn't cruelty or narcissism. It's the radical, almost revolutionary act of believing that they matter as much as anyone else in the world. Within this recognition lies a specific psychological crisis that Jung identified, the individuation imperative. This is the moment when your psyche insists that you become who you truly are, not the self you were trained to be in order to survive. Often it emerges as what I call empathic burnout, a deep, soul-level exhaustion far beyond ordinary tiredness, arising from years of living inauthentically. Jung recognized this as the psyche's necessary rebellion against continued self-abandonment. The signs are unmistakable. Caring no longer feels effortless. Helping others, once a source of meaning, can feel heavy, draining, even suffocating. You may start resenting the very qualities that once defined you, your boundless willingness to give. Jung didn't see this as failure. He saw it as psychological emergence, the authentic self striving to be born. But for this birth to happen, the false self, the one constructed to serve others, must be carefully dismantled. This is where Jung's concept of the transcendent function becomes essential. The transcendent function allows the psyche to bridge opposites, in this case the caring self and the self-caring self. It's not about choosing one over the other, but integrating both into what Jung called individuated wholeness. During this transformative period, empaths often feel as though they are betraying everyone they love simply by changing. Friends or family might say, "You're not the same person anymore," or "You've become selfish." And yet this shift isn't a betrayal. It's the vital emergence of the authentic self, the self that has long been waiting behind the shadow, ready to claim its rightful place in your life. Jung understood this as the collective's resistance to individual development. Yet he discovered something profound about this process. The people who truly love you will support your individuation, while those who resist it often benefit from your self-abandonment. Jung called this differentiation anxiety, the fear that establishing healthy boundaries might end relationships that have relied on your overgiving. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But for empaths, this journey demands what I call developmental courage, the willingness to disappoint those who preferred you diminished, to stand firm in your authenticity even when it shakes the comfort of others. If you've ever been told you've changed since setting boundaries, know this: you didn't change, you simply stopped hiding. Jung recognized that this individuation crisis is more than a psychological shift, it's a spiritual emergency. The soul's deep call for authenticity cannot be ignored. The empath who answers this call doesn't become less caring, they become consciously caring rather than compulsively giving. And this is where Jung introduced a concept that is often misunderstood: sacred selfishness. This is not narcissistic self-absorption. Sacred selfishness is what Jung described as the ethical obligation to become yourself. The recognition that your first responsibility lies with your own psychological development. Jung beautifully wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." For empaths, looking inward often exposes years of self-neglect disguised as virtue, revealing how much of their giving was unconscious self-abandonment. What I call conscious selfishness has several core elements which Jung identified as essential for psychological health. First, emotional sovereignty. the understanding that you are not responsible for managing other people's feelings. Jung noted that taking on this responsibility often prevents others from growing and keeps you trapped in overextension. Second, boundary consciousness, the ability to sense where you end and others begin. Jung termed this ego boundary development, recognizing it as crucial for both personal well-being and authentic relationships. Third, need legitimacy, acknowledging that your own needs are just as valid as anyone else's. Empaths often invert this natural order, treating their own needs as optional while treating others as mandatory. Remarkably, Jung discovered that empaths who cultivate sacred selfishness do not become less helpful, they become more effective and present. They give from choice rather than compulsion, from fullness rather than emptiness, from strength rather than weakness. This generates what Jung called differentiated love, the capacity to care for others without losing yourself in the process. You can feel compassion without absorbing pain. You can offer support without taking responsibility for every emotion around you. You can love without disappearing. Jung understood that the highest form of service arises from those who have undertaken their own psychological work, who give not from obligation, but from conscious, empowered care, the hallmark of true individuation. The person who has reclaimed their sacred selfishness offers the world their authentic presence rather than a people-pleasing performance. This shift is subtle, yet profound, no longer bending to meet everyone else's expectations. They present themselves fully, without apology. If you've learned that taking care of yourself actually makes you a better helper to others, you understand what Jung meant when he emphasized conscious giving. Comment, I give from overflow, not emptiness, if this resonates with you. Jung wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For empaths, this includes embracing every part of themselves, even those desires once deemed selfish: recognition, rest, reciprocity, and respect. All the things they were taught were wrong to want now become essential to their wholeness. Jung made a profound observation about what happens to empathic relationships when sacred selfishness is practiced. He called it relational recalibration, the process in which connections either deepen through mutual authenticity or dissolve because they were originally based on the empath's self-abandonment. Empaths who begin setting boundaries often discover something surprising. Many of their past relationships were built on what Jung termed projective identification. People weren't relating to them as individuals, but as functions: the caretaker, the listener, the problem solver. When empaths step out of these roles, some people react with what I call supply withdrawal. Anger, manipulation, or accusations arise because their emotional needs are no longer automatically fulfilled. Yet Jung also documented something beautiful. The relationships that survive this transformation evolve into what he called authentic encounters. Here, the dynamic of one giving and one receiving shifts. Instead, both individuals meet as equals, each fully responsible for their own emotional well-being. As Jung wrote, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But true transformation can only occur between individuated people, those who know where they end and others begin. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of what I call relational selectivity. Not everyone deserves access to your empathy. Not every person asking for help is ready to receive it. Not every relationship that feels familiar is healthy. Empaths often confuse intensity with intimacy, need with love, and drama with depth. Learning to discern these differences requires cultivating what Jung termed psychological discernment, the ability to perceive people as they are rather than as you wish them to be. So the individuated empath attracts a different circle of people than the self-abandoning empath. They draw in those who are also committed to their own psychological work, rather than those seeking someone to carry their emotional labor. In this way, sacred selfishness not only transforms the empath's inner life, but reshapes their outer world, creating authentic connections based on equality, respect, and mutual growth, the very hallmark of individuation Jung described. Jung observed that this shift can feel profoundly lonely at first because the empath is actively breaking generational patterns of codependency. Yet this solitude is temporary, and it ultimately leads to what he called authentic belonging, relationships built on mutual respect rather than mutual need. If you've noticed that setting boundaries changed who wants to be around you, comment, "I attracted my equals when I stopped accepting less." Jung's wisdom is clear. Authentic relationships cannot exist until you become an authentic person yourself. Becoming authentic requires embracing what Jung and I call sacred selfishness. Jung's vision of psychological wholeness includes what I term the integrated empath, someone who has reclaimed their sensitivity as a conscious, intentional choice rather than an unconscious compulsion. This person embodies Jung's ideal of individuation achieved where the empath's gifts are no longer a burden, but a conscious source of power. The integrated empath possesses what Jung described as conscious empathy, the ability to feel with others deeply without losing themselves in the process. They have learned to use their sensitivity as a tool rather than being used by it. Jung outlines several key characteristics of psychological integration that apply specifically to empaths. First, emotional choice, the capacity to decide when, where, and how much to feel with others. Jung understood that healthy empathy has an on-off switch, controlled by conscious will rather than automatic, draining response. Second, compassionate detachment, the ability to care without caring. Jung observed that the most effective helpers maintain what he called loving distance, close enough to offer meaningful support, yet far enough away to maintain perspective. Third, reciprocal relationships, connections where empathy flows both ways. Integrated empaths naturally attract individuals who are also capable of giving, creating what Jung termed mutual individuation. As Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the integrated empath, this is achieved by recognizing that their truest self encompasses both their capacity for deep compassion and their right to self-preservation. This integration fosters what Jung called earned security, a profound inner stability that is independent of others' approval or emotional state. The integrated empath can witness others' pain without absorbing it, offer support without taking responsibility, and love without losing themselves. In this way, Jung understood that such integration serves not only the individual but the collective good. Integrated empaths model healthy boundaries, authentic relationships, and conscious compassion, demonstrating that it is possible to be sensitive without being self-destructive. The journey from unconscious empathy to conscious empathy is, in Jung's terms, the hero's journey of the psyche. It requires confronting the shadow, integrating opposites, and courageously choosing wholeness over the fleeting comfort of approval. If you've learned to help others without hurting yourself, comment, "I'm a conscious empath now." Jung's final insight about empaths is profound. Your sensitivity is indeed a gift. But it only becomes transformative when it is offered from a place of choice rather than compulsion, strength rather than weakness, wholeness rather than woundedness. Jung's most profound discovery about empaths centers on what I call freedom realization. The moment when you understand that your empathy was never truly about other people. It was about you, trying to feel safe in an unpredictable world. As Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For empaths, the journey often reveals that their hyper-responsibility for others was actually a strategy to control their environment, to manage the emotional chaos they experienced in childhood. This recognition can be both liberating and terrifying. Suddenly, you see that much of what you once called love was actually psychological management, unconscious strategies designed to keep people calm, happy, and stable so that you, in turn, could feel secure. Yet Jung discovered something profoundly liberating in this realization. Once you understand that your empathy was a survival mechanism, you are no longer controlled by unconscious programming. You gain the ability to choose to either maintain your patterns or consciously transform them. You become what Jung called the author of your own psychological story. This newfound freedom gives rise to what I call authentic empathy, sensitivity that arises from love rather than fear, from conscious choice rather than compulsion, from strength rather than vulnerability. The integrated empath feels with others because they want to, not because they feel obligated. Jung also observed that this transformation often triggers what he called existential guilt, the sense that you are betraying your essential nature by altering the voice in your head that insists, "I've always been the helper," or "people depend on me," or even, "What if no one loves me if I'm not useful?" Jung understood this guilt as the final resistance of the false self, the identity built entirely around serving others. He called it identity grief, the mourning of a version of yourself that was never truly real but felt familiar, comforting, and safe. He further identified the freedom paradox, the realization that having the choice to help actually makes helping more meaningful, not less. When empathy becomes voluntary rather than compulsive, it transforms from burden to gift. The ultimate truth Jung revealed is this: you were never meant to be an emotional caretaker for the world. You were meant to be a conscious individual, someone who decides when and how to offer your gift. Your empathy was designed to be a superpower, not a burden. As Jung wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for the empath, this means embracing the full spectrum of your gifts, desires, and boundaries, finally stepping into your power with awareness, freedom, and choice. For empaths, this includes fully accepting that they have the right to exist without constantly proving their worth through service to others. This profound acceptance fosters what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the recognition that you are the ultimate authority on your own experience. No one else can dictate what you should feel, what you should give, or who you should be. It is the foundation of inner freedom, the first step toward reclaiming your power and your life. Jung observed that empaths who achieve this sovereignty often move through what he termed the reparenting phase. This involves learning to provide themselves with the unconditional acceptance they never received as children. They cultivate an internal voice of kindness, prioritize their own needs, and take time to celebrate their achievements. This internal reparenting is essential because, as Jung understood, you cannot give from emptiness indefinitely. Only from fullness can authentic, nurturing flow outward. The empath who learns to nurture themselves discovers the ability to offer genuine, authentic care to others. Jung also noted that psychological sovereignty frequently requires grieving the unlived life, mourning the dreams, goals, and experiences that were sacrificed to maintain others' comfort. You may recognize that past choices in careers, relationships, and life paths were guided more by others' needs than your own. Yet Jung saw this grief as both necessary and healing. It is the psyche's way of honoring what was lost while creating space for what now seeks to emerge. The empath who achieves this sovereignty uncovers something remarkable. Their capacity for genuine compassion actually grows. When you are no longer draining yourself for others, you can give from abundance, from strength, and from wholeness rather than from depletion. Jung observed that free empaths become conscious healers, people who support others from a place of completeness rather than woundedness. They no longer need to fix others to feel valuable, nor do they need to be needed to validate their existence. This fosters what Jung called liberated love, affection without conditions, help without creating dependency, and presence that does not demand reciprocity. Jung's final message about empaths is unmistakable. The journey is not about becoming less sensitive. It is about becoming consciously sensitive. It is about reclaiming your empathy as a gift you choose to offer, rather than as a debt you feel compelled to pay. However, Jung also cautioned about what he called the integration temptation, the strong pull to revert to old patterns when others feel discomfort with your new boundaries. Growth requires unwavering commitment to your truth, even in the face of pressure to return to your former self. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, a reminder that sovereignty, conscious empathy, and liberation are the true marks of psychological individuation. For empaths, this means fully recognizing that who you truly are encompasses both your deep capacity for compassion and your inherent right to exist completely, fully, and without apology. If you've come to understand that your empathy is a choice rather than an obligation, comment, "I choose when to care," and that makes it more powerful. Jung understood that the integrated empath becomes a beacon not through endless self-sacrifice, but through the clarity and strength of self-realization. You show the world what it looks like to be simultaneously sensitive and strong, caring yet boundaried, empathic yet whole. The freedom to decide when and how to offer your care is the ultimate gift Jung offered to empaths. This choice transforms sensitivity from a weakness others might exploit into a consciously wielded strength, a superpower you control rather than a burden you endure. The empath, at their core, is still the child who was never allowed to be selfish. But now you understand what Jung truly meant. Your empathy is not a flaw. It is a reflection of unfinished development, a skill honed for survival rather than conscious purpose. The path forward, as Jung showed, isn't about becoming less empathic. It's about becoming consciously empathic, choosing to feel, give, and connect with full awareness. This is where sacred selfishness comes in, the healthy ego strength that allows for authentic relationships and genuine service. You no longer need to see caring for others as mutually exclusive with caring for yourself. Jung's individuation process provides a roadmap for integrating both into psychological wholeness. The child who was never allowed to be selfish can mature into the adult who intentionally decides when and how to give their gifts. Your sensitivity, once a survival tool, becomes a superpower, but only when it flows from strength rather than survival, from conscious choice rather than compulsion, from wholeness rather than woundedness. Jung spent his life demonstrating that the most empathic individuals are those who have first learned to empathize with themselves. And the next time someone tells you that you're too sensitive or accuses you of being selfish, remember Jung's wisdom. You're not too much for this world. You're finally becoming enough for yourself. This transformation from unconscious empathy to conscious empathy is exactly what the world needs. Not more people who give themselves away until they break, but more people who recognize their worth and give from overflow. If you want to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological transformation, check out my video, Why You Lost Interest in Your Hobbies, After Awakening, where we dive into how the development of consciousness reshapes your relationship with activities, interests, and self-expression. The empath who was never allowed to be selfish is finally free to choose. And that choice to love yourself as fully as you love others is the most generous gift you can offer to a world that desperately needs whole, conscious, integrated people. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next dimension.